Szanowni Państwo, za chwilę rozpoczniemy obchody 75. rocznicy wyzwolenia obozu Auschwitz. Uprzejmie proszę Państwa o zajmowanie miejsc. Proszę o wyłączenie telefonów komórkowych i nie...
And mute your mobile phones. Please do not take photos during the official part of the commemoration. Please let me once again request that it is very important. Please set your mobile phones to mute and do not take photos during the official part of the commemoration. The commemoration will be translated into 4 languages: Polish, English, Russian, and Hebrew. On your sets, you can set channel 1 for Polish, channel 2 for English, channel 3 for Hebrew, and channel 4 for Russian. Please let me repeat this message. Channel 1 is Polish, channel 2 English, channel 3 Hebrew, and channel 4 Russian. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we are about to start the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of liberation of Auschwitz. May I once again request setting your mobiles to mute and taking no photographs during the official part of our commemoration. May I also reiterate that Polish is on channel 1, channel 2 is English, channel 3 is Hebrew, and channel 4 is Russian. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome to this commemoration former inmates of the camp and Holocaust survivors. May I welcome your highnesses, presidents, prime ministers, and all the heads of parliaments and heads of state delegations. May I welcome representatives of the Polish Parliament and parliamentarians from Europe and the world. May I welcome members of governments from Poland, Europe, and the world. I welcome representatives of the diplomatic corps, the donors who have support Pillars of Memory Auschwitz Foundation Endowment Fund. May I welcome representatives of churches and religious communities, notably communes and communities of the Jewish society, and also the representatives of the Roma, representatives of regional authorities and local governments, representatives of all the institutions and organizations, and all the other people who have arrived at this commemoration. May I now request the address from the President of the Republic of Poland, Mr. Andrzej Duda. Honorable survivors, witnesses of the Holocaust. Your Royal Highnesses, Your Serenities, Your Excellencies, Presidents, Prime Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. A train has just arrived at the unloading ramp. People started to get off the freight wagons and walked towards the grove. When I got up in the morning to wash the floor, people were walking. Women, men, and children. I went out at night in front of the block. I could see lamps shining over the barbed wire in the darkness. The road lay in the darkness, but I could clearly hear the distant hubbub of thousands of voices. People walked on and on. Fire rose from the woods and lit up the sky, and with the fire, a human cry rose. For days and nights, people continued walking. The wagons were constantly coming up to the ramp, and people were walking on. This is how Auschwitz was described in the summer of 1944 by a Polish inmate of the camp, writer Tadeusz Borowski. Crowds of people walking, led, driven to mass death. We in Poland know well the truth about what was happening here, as it was recounted by our compatriots who had camp numbers tattooed on their bodies by Germans. It's been 75 years since the end of that monstrous, horrendous, and criminal nightmare that was unfolding in this place for nearly 5 years. It has been 3 generations since that day, the 27th of January 1945, when a few thousand prisoners, victims of cruelty, exhausted by slave work, hunger, and disease, lived to see, finally, the liberation by the soldiers of the Red Army. We have here with us today the last living survivors, people who endured the hell of Auschwitz, the last of those who saw the Holocaust with their own eyes, and among them those who experienced the fate of the Jewish nation, as referred to in the Psalm 44. We are killed all day long. We are considered as sheep to be slaughtered. We have come here together, members of 61 delegations from all over the world, to commemorate jointly the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. We are standing in front of the gate leading to the camp that claimed lives of the largest number of victims and that has become the symbol of the Shoah. We pay tribute to all the 6 million Jews murdered in this and in the other camps, in the ghettos and places of martyrdom and torture, in the streets of cities and small towns. We stand here before you, honorable survivors, to assume anew, in the presence of the witnesses of the Holocaust, an obligation. This is an obligation we take thinking of those who perished, of you who have survived, and of the future generations as well. The genocide perpetrated here by the functionaries of the Nazi Third Reich claimed more than 1,300,000 human lives. Among them, there were Poles, the Roma, Soviet prisoners of war, but first and foremost, Jews, whom over 1,100,000 were slain here. We are speaking about numbers, but these numbers represent concrete people, their life stories and their suffering. We're speaking about numbers, although we will certainly never get to know the exact figures. Yet we are speaking about numbers as we are in the factory of death. For numbers make us realize the industrial nature of the crime perpetrated here. The Holocaust, of which Auschwitz is the main locus and the main symbol, constituted an unexampled crime throughout the entire history of humankind. Here, the hatred, chauvinism, nationalism, racism, anti-Semitism assumed the form of a mass and organized, methodical murder. At no other time and at no other place was extermination carried out in a similar manner. Jews from Poland, Hungary, France, the Netherlands, Greece, and from other occupied countries all over Europe were brought here in cattle cars. They underwent selection and were deprived of all their belongings. And in their vast majority, they were immediately killed in the gas chambers and burned in the ovens of the crematoria. All of that took but a few hours, quarters, minutes. For years, the factory of death operated at full capacity. Smoke was rising from the chimneys, the transports were rolling. People walked and walked in their thousands to meet their death. It is hard to encompass it all with your mind today. The magnitude of the crime perpetrated in this place is terrifying, but we must not look away from it. And we must never forget it. When the front was approaching to put an end to the crime, the perpetrators attempted to obliterate its traces. They would destroy the buildings and the documents of the genocide. Having slain millions, they also wanted to wipe out the memory of them. However, their attempts failed. Witnesses were saved, of whom you, honorable survivors, are the last ones. And this very place has been preserved, the tangible evidence and the symbol of the Holocaust. Hence we stand here today on the premises of the former German Auschwitz camp. We stand all together and bow our heads before the suffering of the victims of this most horrendous crime in history, and before the survivors, in the presence of the last witnesses, we do assume an obligation for the future. In the name of the Republic of Poland, who was the first target of Nazi Germany's aggression, whose territory was occupied and its nation was subjected to terror, who established the largest European underground resistance movement against the Third Reich, whose soldiers fought against Germans on all the fronts of the Second World War, from the first to the last day of the war, whose 6 million citizens died at the hands of Nazis, including 3 million Jews, and who makes an utmost effort to preserve this place, the premises of the Auschwitz camp, as well as all the other places of the Shoah, the former German camps located in our territory. I have the privilege and honor, on behalf of the Republic of Poland, to renew the obligation that we Poles assumed back then, when the Holocaust was being carried out, when our forefathers came to the aid of the murdered Jews, putting their own lives at risk, who were the first ones to reveal to the world the truth about the Shoah and demanded that the world's statesmen respond. The obligation to which we, the contemporary Poles, consistently adhere, also for the sake of the memory of our heroic compatriots, to mention Witold Pilecki and Jan Karski. On behalf of the Republic of Poland, it is my privilege and guard to always nurture the memory and guard the truth about what happened here. I wish to invite the distinguished guests gathered here today, representatives of foreign states and nations, as well as international institutions and all people of goodwill from across the world, to participate in this endeavor. Let it be our joint commitment, undertaken before the last survivors and witnesses, to keep carrying into the future the message and the warning for the whole mankind that stem from this place. Distorting the history of the Second World War, denying the crimes of genocide and the Holocaust, as well as an instrumental use of Auschwitz to attain any given goal, is tantamount to desecration of the memory of the victims whose ashes are scattered here. The truth about the Holocaust must not die. The memory of Auschwitz must last so that such extermination is never repeated again. Once again, thank you, honorable survivors, for your testimony and for your presence here today. May the memory of all the victims of Auschwitz live eternally. May the memory of the victims of the Holocaust live eternally.
And now, let us listen to witnesses. May I ask a former Auschwitz inmate, Batsheva Dagan, to take the floor. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Let me say shalom from Israel. It is difficult for me to hide my feelings. I'm standing here in front of you. I'm not sure whether it is real or whether I'm dreaming that I am here with you 75 years on after what happened here, this great suffering that took place here. My number was 45,554. Schutzhäftling in German is an inmate under protection. Here, then, in that other reality that used to unfold here, this word did not mean actually protection. Care for another human being did not belong there. Human dignity did not belong there either. Quite the opposite. Even if you open a dictionary, you will not find a phrase that would describe how human dignity was trampled. So this word, inmate, and under protection, Schutzhäftling, what was it for? So much despise in there, in this devilish world where human dignity was treated as if it were dirt. There was no way of finding shelter anywhere. I am Häftling. All those people that were in a lager would be surprised, but I did not have a striped uniform because there were too few. And I was given a Russian soldier uniform. I had to wear it on my body directly, and my legs were wrapped in a praying shawl. That shawl that is used by Jews. And I had those Dutch wooden shoes. Mind you, they were uneven. What else did they do to me? First, they tattooed a number on my arm. And it is just as visible today as it was back then. It was very well tattooed indeed. So, I couldn't recognize myself. Those blocks, they had windows very high. I raised my hands, and that is when I recognized myself to be myself. The worst thing that I went through at the very beginning, well, it is hard to say actually what was more painful to me. Whether it was the process of tattooing a number on my arm or something else. I believe, though, that was what was the most hurtful for me was the loss of her, because the hair gave me a sense of belonging to womanhood, and they were smooth. This hair was my own. And this criminal hand touched my hair. This crown of mine was taken away from me. And I was turned into this pitiful, sad creature. My hand touched a naked skull. And I could see the contour of my face. I couldn't recognize myself. Is it really me? Where is my crown? And in the mirror, I recognized myself, or rather it was not a mirror, it was a glass, a window, and it was really me. Her braids were used for different purposes. Who could think back then that they would be used as a resource for mattresses? However, what they were really after was depriving me of my own human face, and hair would grow back as nature commanded. And there was this dream within my heart. It was still alive. Maybe tomorrow will come one day. And tomorrow did come indeed. Memories remained, though. And let me tell you something else. I worked in 4 commandos in the lager. The first one, I would collect herbs that were somewhat poisonous, and my hands would bleed 12 hours per day. As we sit here, we remember that we would be woken up at 4 a.m. because I was collecting nettle. And actually this nettle was used to make soup. This woman, Aufseher, everybody knows who she was, what this word means. She was really cruel. She had a dog, she had a stick, and she would beat us up. What she wanted was this basket of grass to be not only full but also packed. And I spent many years in this, or rather many months in this commando. And then there was the second one, Kartoffel Commando. I was there rather briefly. There was this Lagerstrasse, the street there. I met my cousin, and she was a doctor's wife. And she worked at what we call a revier. Chimneys, smoking on the one hand, and hospitals on the other. But hospitals, well, that's just a name. And I caught all the diseases you could think of, and I still remember the German names for all those diseases. And there was this itching all the time. I was the best candidate to be sent to chimneys. Now, Dr. Mengele, when he inspected us, we would have to stand in rows naked, and we would be driven to death. But I said I wouldn't go, and I hid under a bed, under the cover, and somehow I saved myself in this way. And there was another commando later. So I had to kill lice, and I learned then that there are two types of those creatures. The first type of lice live on your heads, and the second type lives in your clothes. So I would kill lice with my fingers. This would be the first job that I had to do in the morning. I had been through a terrible diseases, actually. And Canada was the next commando that I got in. It was the inmates themselves who came up with this name. So I worked in Canada. I'm sure there are people here from Hungary. I would hold Hungarian clothes in my hands. At first, I would cry, but then I had to get used to that, because that was to become my job. There were all those huge piles of clothes from different corners of the world. And there I saw a photograph of my teachers from Lodz. In 1944, the ghetto in Łódź was liquidated. So this was my meeting. So how do you live in such a place? Jewish schools had been closed down, so I decided that I had to learn something. And there were all those languages that surrounded me. 15, maybe more people who work here will know better. So I would hear all those languages that surround me, and I thought I need to learn something. Well, I will learn a language. So I found this Belgian lady, and she became my teacher. I had no pencil, I had no paper, I had nothing to help me. And on I went with my learning. So when I left Auschwitz-Birkenau, I spoke fluent French. There was another thing that I learned here. Poems and melodies that were created by inmates. Krystyna Żywulska was one of them. And her poem became our prayer. It's a very long poem. I'm not going to recite it here. I still know it by heart, like I did all those years ago. So, this poem, Krystyna Żywulska's poem, Marching Out into the Field, was known to me in the camp as Marching Out of the Gate, became our prayer here. The description of our suffering was an expression of each one of us. However, not every prisoner was able to describe the painful reality in such a manner. The main source of strength was the crazy lust of revenge for so much agony and so many complaints, bayonets into the brain and daggers to the neck. The words of revolt wandered from mouth to mouth and only changed slightly depending on the memory and personal associations of female prisoners. The thought of revenge became a source of strength, allowing to endure the long days and nights of inhumane suffering. I continue learning all the time. Now, what helped me to survive was that I myself decided to do something for myself. I decided to choose what I want, rather than following orders. However, I did not get to be liberated on the 27th because we could hear the Russian army approaching, their cannons firing. So basically, I did not get to experience this liberation. I was driven out and made to march. Could I have some water, please? Just a little bit, not much. So that's what I thought back then. So it was a dream about freedom, and a heart beat to the pace of revenge for all that suffering because we had to wait in a queue to death. And various countries in the world did nothing. And I still have this feeling today. Where was everybody? Where was the world who could see that, who could hear that, and yet did nothing to save all those thousands? So what now with the world? It was my dream to learn. Apologies. Let me just say it from the bottom of my heart, rather than reading out from a piece of paper. So, I was meant to liquidate Auschwitz-Birkenau. What was my last job in Canada? Mind you, Canada was a name that Sonderkommando, the inmates, came up with. Canada is a rich country, isn't it? And in Canada, there were all these items brought with them by all those inmates from all these countries. This is where they were collected. And I saw it all. Now, the upside to working in Canada was that you could eat things. We would eat whatever was brought by people. Because people coming here had been told that they were being taken to work. They had been asked to take some food with them. So all this food was being brought to Canada. And we were sickly and thin. We would eat that. Can you eat such things? Well, back then, anything was possible. There was one more thing that helped helped us to live in this hell. Friendship. You could find a group of people who would help one another. Shoah, the Holocaust, are not only about the terrible things. And what about the righteousness among the nations that helped? There are many other things, subjects that can be taught to children. I had the struggle, namely, I would like the subject to be introduced at an earlier stage. Why so? In various countries where children are 13, 15 years old, it's already too late. Because at this point they are undergoing certain physiological changes. And what they think about is themselves and their position in a social group. So a question. Is it necessary to teach that subject? Is it possible? I have an answer to those questions. Yes, it is very much necessary, and it is by all means possible. Why is it truly necessary? We live in the world of the media, and we have those phones, iPhones, whatever its name is. People play with those objects, even toddlers. So children grow up playing with those iPhones, and they know more than we would like them to know. For that reason, this subject, this topic needs to be taught as early as possible. Well, in Israel, it's different because we have those sounds. Children ask why they hear those sounds. However, in other countries, they don't have that. I'm sure there are teachers here. I'm addressing the teachers at this point. First, you need to learn what children know and what is the source of their knowledge. You need to learn what they would like to know. I've been to various places. I've been to Argentina, to Canada. I've been to America many a time, and I spent 3 years in England. I wanted to learn, so the first thing that I did was I picked up Hebrew very fast. I went to this teaching college. Also, I worked as a kindergarten teacher. Children would approach me about why I had this thing written. Well, for 40 years I'd been looking for an answer. Mind you, in museum you have 4 books in Polish. They have been translated from Hebrew. Well, for the most part. They are meant to be used in schools. What else should I say? Maybe that I would like to cry, because only with tears I can tell you about this past. I can see so many people here. You are a source of comfort to us. I hope you will all try to preserve the memory of this place and other sites where people, innocent people, died. People from various nations. I hope that you will make sure you'll bear this responsibility so that this terrible thing will never happen again. Thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, may I ask a former Auschwitz inmate, Elsa Baker, to take the floor.
people alive. You might be interested to know that only 6 months ago, I was here at the Auschwitz Memorial commemorating an event that took place there on the 2nd of August 1944. Almost 4,300 men, women, and children from our camp, after one of those Nazi selection processes, were condemned to be murdered that very night. I was among those the Nazis selected to be put into cattle trains and to be deported to Ravensbrück concentration camp. Even today, it's extremely difficult for me to come back to the place of the former concentration camp Auschwitz. I experienced firsthand the effect of anti-Gypsyism, anti-Semitism, and racism. I myself survived Auschwitz to shell-shock and the selfless act of some of my fellow inmates. For decades, after 1945, the genocide committed against Sinti and Roma was largely ignored. It took a private initiative by Vincent Rose, one of the early activists of the Sinti and Roma civil rights movement, to erect a modest memorial on the site of the former camp to commemorate the Sinti and Roma murdered at Auschwitz. Today, it is the setting for memorial services like the one I attended last August. Those that were murdered and those that survived the camps must never be forgotten. Hopefully, this memorial site and museum will remain here for many years to come as a warning to people not to let racism and insane ideologies backed by wrong sciences like, for example, eugenics, gain power again. May I just say one thing that is very near to me? In times like this, when minorities have to feel vulnerable again, I can only hope that everyone would stand up for democracy and human rights. Thank you.
Szanowni Państwo, o zabranie głosu proszę byłego więźnia obozu Auschwitz, pana Mariana Turskiego.
Moi drodzy towarzysze niedoli obozowej, dostojni gości, szanowni zgromadzeni, przyjaciele. Jestem jednym z tych jeszcze żyjących, nielicznych, którzy byli w tym miejscu niemal do ostatniej chwili przed wyzwoleniem. 18 stycznia zaczęła się moja tak zwana ewakuacja z obozu Auschwitz, która po 6,5 dniach zakończyła się, okazała się marszem śmierci dla więcej niż połowy moich współwięźniów. Byliśmy razem w kolumnie 600-osobowej. Wedle wszelkiego prawdopodobieństwa ja nie doczekam już następnego jubileuszu. Takie są prawa. Dlatego wybaczycie.
How it goes. So please forgive me that there will be some emotions in what I'm going to say. Now, this is what I would like to say, to tell primarily to my daughter, to my granddaughter who is here in this room, and I would like to thank her for that, to my grandson as well. But I'm mostly after those who are the peers of my daughter and my grandchildren, the younger generations, especially the youngest, those who are even younger than they are. When the World War broke out, I was but a teenager. In the First World War, my father was a soldier, and he was shot into his lungs, and that kept repeating. That was a drama for our family, and it went on and on. My mother hailed from the Polish, Lithuanian, Belarusian borderland. Armies went forth and back. They pillaged, raped, burnt villages, not to leave anything for those who were coming after them. So you could say that I had first-hand experience of war. Nonetheless, even though it was only 20, 25 years apart, those times seemed so distant, like those Polish 19th century uprisings, like the French Revolution. And that was only 20 years away. So when today I meet young people, I perfectly well realize that after 75, if not 80 years, people get somewhat bored. They find war, Shoah, Holocaust somewhat of a boring subject, just like genocide. And I actually understand them. That is why I promise to you, the young, that I'm not telling you about my suffering. I'm not telling you about what I experienced, my 2 death marches, how I finished the war weighing 32 kilo, really on the verge of life, utterly exhausted. I'm not telling the things that were worst, the tragedy of the farewells, of parting with the near and dear, when after the selection you see and you sense their fate. No, I'm not telling you about that. What I would like to pass to my daughter, to my grandchildren, and to their generations, I would like to tell you something about you yourselves. I see we have among us the President of Austria, Mr. Alexander van der Bellen. Do you remember, Mr. President, when you hosted me and the management of the International Auschwitz Committee? We discussed those days. You used such a phrase: Auschwitz ist nicht vom Himmel gefallen. Auschwitz did not fall down from the skies. You could say that's an obvious thing. Absolutely obvious. It did not. This may even seem a hackneyed phrase, quite commonplace perhaps, yet this is a profound shortcut in our thinking. And it helps to understand certain things. Let's use our imagination and our thoughts to get to the early 1930s, to Berlin. We find ourselves in the center of Berlin. Bayerische Viertel, the Bavarian district, is the name of the district. It's just 3 stops away from the Tiergarten, the zoo. There is a station of the metro there. There is Baryschew Park. And one day, in those early 1930s, you can read an inscription on the benches. Jews must not sit on these benches. You could say, it's unpleasant, it's not fair, it's not right. But after all, there are so many benches around. You can sit somewhere else. Of course you can. In that district, and that was a district that was inhabited by intellectuals, by the intelligentsia, German, of Jewish origin. Albert Einstein used to live there. Nelly Sachs, the Nobel Prize winner, a politician and industrialist, Walter Rathenau, who was Minister of Foreign Affairs. There was a swimming pool, and over its door an inscription read, "Jews are forbidden to enter." You could say, well, pleasant this is not, but there are so many places in Berlin where you can take a bath or swim, so many lakes, canals, it's nearly like Venice. At the same time, you can read somewhere else, Jews must not belong to German singing associations. So what? All right. They want to sing, they want to make music. Let them just meet somewhere else. They will do their singing. All right. What comes up later is an order, really. More of an order than of an inscription. Non-Aryan children must not play with Aryan children, with the German children. All right. They'll play on their own. And then you read, we only sell bread and food to Jews after 5 p.m. Right, less choice. This makes your life harder. But after all, after 5 p.m. you can still do your shopping. Now, I warn you, I'm getting used to a thought. That thought that someone may be excluded becomes mediated into our lives. The thought that somebody can be stigmatized, that someone may be alienated. And that's how it is done, step by step, slowly. People begin to see that this is something normal. Both victims and the perpetrators, the witnesses, those whom we in English call bystanders, those who see it become familiar, and they become acquainted with that thought, familiar with the idea that the minority that produced Einstein, Nelly Sachs, Henry Heine, Mendelssohn's, and many Nobelists, that it is different, that it can be pushed beyond the margin of the society, that they are different people, that they are alien people, that they are the people that carry germs, that cause pandemics. And this now is a horror that's dangerous. This is where what may happen soon takes its origin. And let me tell you, if you consider that, and if we remember the words of Mr. President, power that at that time ran sly policy. For example, they met all the claims of workers. The 1st of May was never celebrated. All right, they gave you a day that was free from work. They introduced Kraft durch heute, so a special holiday for workers. They could also fight unemployment. They knew how to play on the dignity of a nation. Germans move up from the shame of Treaty of Versailles. Have your pride back. And that government also saw that people were slowly engulfed by this lack of sensitivity. They ceased to react to evil. And that was the moment when that government could speed up the process of evil. What came later was something that developed immediately. Jews could not get jobs, they could not emigrate, and then quickly Jews would be sent to ghettos, to Kaunas, to Riga, to my ghetto, the Litzmannstadt, that's a Łódź ghetto. Most people from there were later sent to Kulmhof, Chełmno on the Ner, where they were murdered in lorries with exhaust gases. And the rest will make their way to Auschwitz, where in a very modern way and manner, they were murdered with Zyklon B in all those modern gas chambers. And here you see how the words of the president come true. Auschwitz did not fall suddenly from the skies. It was pittering, pattering in all those tiny steps. It was approaching until what happened here behind me did happen. My daughter, my granddaughter, peers of my daughter, peers of my granddaughter, you do not have to know the name of Primo Levi. Primo Levi was one of the most famous inmates of this camp. Primo Levi once used that phrase, "This happened," which means that it may happen again, which means that it may happen anywhere in this world. May I share one personal memory with you? In 1965, I went for a scholarship to the US, to America. And that was the peak, the acme of that battle for human rights, for civil rights, for the Afro-Americans. It was my honor to participate in a march with Martin Luther King from Selma to Montgomery. And then people who learned that I had been an inmate of Auschwitz would ask me, how do you think? It must have been only in Germany, or do you think it could happen somewhere else? And then I told them, it can also happen in your country, in this land, when the civil rights are broken, when people do not obey the laws of minorities, when you do away with the rights of minorities. If you bend law, as it was done in Selma, this may come to be. What to do? There is only one way out. Only you, if you are capable of defending your constitution, defending your laws and your rights, your democratic order, which is based on the protection of minority rights, only then will you be able to conquer all that evil. My dear, here in Europe, most of us hail from the tradition called Judeo-Christian. Both the believers but also the non-believers assume as their civilizational canon the Ten Commandments. My friend, my closest friend, the president of the International Auschwitz Committee, Roman Kent, who spoke here 5 years ago during the previous Jubilee. He couldn't arrive today, he couldn't fly in today. He's frail, he's been sick lately. But he invented the 11th commandment. The 11th commandment that is an experience of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, which is the experience of that horrible time of disdain. And that 11th is be not indifferent. Thou shalt not be indifferent. And this is what I would like to tell you. My daughter, my grandchildren. I'd like to tell it to the peers of my daughter, my grandchildren, wherever they live, be it Poland, be it Israel, be it America, be it Western Europe, the Eastern Europe, yes, precisely, the Eastern Europe. It is very important here. Do not be indifferent when you see lies, historical lies. Do not be indifferent when you see that the past is stretched to fit the current political needs. Do not be indifferent when any minority is discriminated, because the essence of democracy is that majority governs, but democracy hinges on the rights of minorities being protected, and they have to be protected. At the same time, do not be indifferent when any power or government infringes all the social compacts that are there, that are already extant. And keep the commandments. 11th, thou shalt not be indifferent. Because if you are, you won't even notice when your heirs will suddenly see an Auschwitz falling down, dropping down from the skies straight on them.
Szanowni Państwo, o zabranie głosu proszę byłego więźnia Auschwitz, pana Stanisława Zalewskiego.
Stanisław Zalewski to take the floor. Dear and distinguished participants of the solemn commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Konzentrationslager Auschwitz, I address my words of respect to all those who were spurred by the fate from the industrial operations of the German Nazi machine of genocide in Auschwitz and other concentration and extermination camps. A drastic but true way of putting it. And I'm referring to the innumerable amounts of human hair, glasses, prostheses, shoes, clothing, and other items used daily by children, women, and men of different nationalities and religions. So the ashes of those people were scattered by the winds of history, but their immortal souls remained in this zone, invisible to humans. And they came here in great numbers, and they are circulating here among us. If we open our hearts, we will hear their cries, their moans and complaints to God. In a place such as this, words fail, and the heart cries out to God in this dreadful silence. Lord, why did you remain silent? In this silence, we bow our heads before the countless people who suffered and were murdered here. Yet, this silence is a loud cry for forgiveness and reconciliation, a prayer to the living God to prevent it from ever happening again. How many questions come to mind here? One in particular keeps coming up. Where was God in those days? Why was he silent? How could he allow so much destruction, this triumph of evil? These were the words of Pope Benedict XVI during his visit to Auschwitz-Birkenau in 2006, a pope from Germany. He went on to say, "We cannot fathom the mystery of God. We see only fragments, and we are lost when we want to become judges of God in history." These words of the Pope became a point of reference for me. One must not rummage through the conscience of people who who had experienced a time when people deliberately forgot about another person's right to live. From here onwards, I will be referring to my own path, this path meant on this path I saw the Gestapo headquarters in Warsaw and Pawiak, a prison in Warsaw, the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration and extermination camp, the Mauthausen, Gusen I and Gusen II concentration camps. I was brought to this place in October 1943. I was tagged with a number that was tattooed on the inside of my left forearm. And I received other numbers in Mauthausen and Gusen I, Gusen II. The number from Auschwitz, I've had it for 77 years and it is still legible. It is legible and it is a living witness to unforgettable tragic events I remember. In Auschwitz-Birkenau, I remember naked women being driven in trucks from the barracks to a gas chamber. I can hear them screaming. I can hear it in my subconscious when I remember those events. I recall people nicely dressed, wearing the Star of David armbands, walking around with no signs of fear. A large group of these people were led by just one SS officer, and he led them in the direction of the crematorium. However, only me and a few fellow inmates sitting next to me knew about it. I mean Gusen I and Gusen II. In Gusen I and Gusen II, I witnessed death penalties for observing the rules of one religion. I saw prisoners, sick prisoners, killed in the camp hospital by a functionary prisoner. I saw the suicide of prisoners who threw themselves on this electrified barbed wire fence. On the first day of freedom, I witnessed drastic extrajudicial executions performed by prisoners and functionary prisoners. And it was done because of the sadistic nature. It originated and manifested itself in camp conditions, and these are just a few select examples. To live a normal, creative life, I try not to think about the events that took place in the camp, and I found my own way of doing that. So I took my memories and I put them in this airtight box. I tied a rope to it and I threw it into a river. Occasionally I take it out, and I took it for today's event, but once I've used those, I put them back into this box and put them back into the water. However, once the echoes of the ceremony cease, some memories overcome my defenses. They penetrate my memory, trigger reflections, and some questions that remain unanswered. When I say Pater Noster, pray, I recite a verse. Give us our daily bread today, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. So the question is, what is forgiveness of sins? Is it forgetting the damage that was inflicted? Or maybe it's about refraining from imposing punishment. Or maybe it is about abandoning the right for compensation. Can we forgive those who had this description, Gott mit uns, on the buckles of military belts and killed people with premeditation? Let me emphasize that. It was premeditated. Because war is an art of killing. Whoever kills more wins. War breeds violence on both sides. And the stronger will impose a law, and it can be quite cruel. And war blurs the lines between good and evil. To avoid that, there must be reconciliation between nations. Yet reconciliation without historical truth and forgiveness will only be but a bridge without a railing between the edges of a precipice. You can cross it, but not without fear. Therefore, it is a moral obligation of all those present here to act. Act in such a way that nothing like that ever happens again. Under these inhumane conditions that prevailed in Auschwitz and other concentration camps, prisoners, inmates, formed various underground organizations. Their primary goal was that of protecting human life and human dignity. Speaking in modern terms, I was a beneficiary of such an activity, and that made possible for me to survive temporary breakdowns, to overcome this feeling of hopelessness, both in Auschwitz and other camps. Such actions unleash new energy, strengthen certain bonds, and stimulate a person to act, to overcome one's sense of powerlessness, to overcome this loss of hope. I'll give you two examples. A Franciscan, Father Maximilian Kolbe, voluntarily gave up his life for another person, father of a large family. Cavalry Captain Witold Pilecki voluntarily allowed himself to be imprisoned in KL Auschwitz. He organized, or rather, let me phrase that, he fled from Auschwitz to tell the truth about what was happening in Auschwitz-Birkenau. He participated in an uprising in Warsaw, and he was killed by the communist authorities in Poland. So two different people, both incredibly courageous, and they showed heroism and dedication in a place created to exterminate people, and their sacrifice was not in vain. The Witold Pilecki Institute of Solidarity and Martyrdom was established in Poland in 2017. One of the goals of this institute is to commemorate people of different nationalities, victims of German Nazi crimes. And the Maximilian Kolbe Werk Association, established in Germany, has been operating since 1973. It is meant to reach agreement and reconciliation and provide assistance in various forms to former inmates of concentration camps and ghettos, regardless of their religion, their views, and their beliefs. On the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II, the association awarded all former inmates of concentration camps a commemorative medal. The document attached to the medal reads, quote, "You have survived the atrocities and terror prevailing in the camps, but afterwards your lives have been very difficult, and yet in this time you have given great reasons for reconciliation." So, on the medal, you can find a rose that symbolizes your message, that of reconciliation. We believe that your exemplary behavior will also affect others and will be something to follow, especially to those nations that remain adamant and intransigent. You suffered in camps and ghettos and Nazi prisons. Your life had been difficult after the liberation, but all of that was not in vain. Of this, we are truly and deeply convinced. That's how it should be, but it is not. These days, in many regions of the world, people overcome by fanaticism of various kinds, political, racial, and religious, they commit acts of violence to achieve their own personal goals. These acts of violence claims thousands of lives, and that bears the hallmarks of genocide. Has history turned a full circle? I mean a circle propelled and driven by people who do not respect other people's dignity? Dear participants of this commemoration, I am an optimist and I believe in people. So far, in my life, excluding my stay in prisons and concentration camps, I have received more good things than bad things from others. In qualifying human deeds as good or bad, I'm supported by a beautiful woman who has a blindfold on her eyes. In her left hand, she carries balance, and in her right hand, a sharp sword. I will ask this lady to stay with me. On the 26th of January, yesterday, the President of the Republic of Poland, together with his spouse, presented to former inmates of concentration and extermination camp in Auschwitz-Birkenau medals commemorating the 75th anniversary of the liberation. The medal was founded by the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum. Now, there is this message attached to it, and there is this fact that it is the highest Polish authorities present this medal. And that means that basically it is an unwritten document that documents this tragic history of the Polish nation and other nations during World War II. I deeply believe that this event will be used to act for the benefit of all the remaining witnesses of history.
O zabranie głosu proszę przedstawiciela filarów pamięci, największych prywatnych darczyńców Funduszu na rzecz Autentyzmu Auschwitz-Birkenau, pana Ronalda Laudera.
And the pain never stops. I've always wondered if I had been born in Hungary, where my grandparents were from, instead of New York in February 1944, would I have lived? The answer is no. I've been one of the 438,000 Hungarian Jews gassed by the Nazis in 1944, right here in Auschwitz. I can assure you, almost all Jews have pondered this question. 75 years ago today, when Soviet troops entered these gates, they had no idea what lay behind them. And since that day, the entire world has struggled with what they found inside. We have all wondered how an advanced country that gave the world great literature and art, science achievement, could sink to an anger, a meanness, a depravity like Auschwitz. But let me be clear. While Germany and Austria cause created and carry out this shattering evil, practically every other European country helped the Nazis gather up their Jewish citizens. Too many people in too many countries made Auschwitz happen. When European Jews begged the world for a safe harbor, somewhere to go, the entire world turned its back on them. Even my own country, the beacon of freedom, turned out its light on the Jewish people when they needed it most. The United States organized a conference in Evian, France in July 1938 to discuss the Jewish refugee problem. There were a lot of lovely speeches, but America did not let any additional Jewish refugees in, and every other country in attendance followed its lead. There were 32 countries, and none of them, except for the tiny Dominican Republic, wanted any more Jews. Hitler saw this. 4 months later came Kristallnacht, and again, there was no world reaction. Hitler tested the world, and at every step, he saw the truth. The world did not care. That's when he knew he could build this factory of death. Evian led to Auschwitz. Kristallnacht led to Auschwitz. World anti-Semitism led to Auschwitz. Thankfully, there were some people throughout Europe who had a moral decency and acted differently. Ordinary people who risked their lives and their families' lives to save other human beings. Sometimes people they didn't even know. In Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, you will see 27,362 names on what we call the righteous among nations. These Gentiles who risked everything to save Jewish lives, we have not forgotten. These honorable men and women who we will never, never, never forget. God bless them. Five years ago, at the 70th anniversary, I was very concerned about the shocking rise of anti-Semitism here in Europe. Today, you all know the attacks on Jews, the killings, the vicious slanders have only grown worse, and they have spread to my own country. 75 years ago, when the world finally saw the pictures of the gas chambers here and the piles of bodies, nobody in their right mind wanted to be associated with the Nazis. But now, I see something I never thought I would see in my lifetime: the open and brazen spread of anti-Jewish hatred throughout the world once again. In 2020, we hear the same lies the Nazis used so effectively in their propaganda. They said, Jews have too much power. Jews control the economy and the media. Jews control governments. Jews control everything. We hear this madness online, in the media, and even within democratic governments. We will never eradicate anti-Semitism. It's a deadly virus that's been with us for over 2,000 years. But we cannot look the other way and pretend that it doesn't happen. That's what people did throughout the 1930s, and that is what led to Auschwitz. There are 50 countries represented here today. I know each and every one of you is as disgusted by anti-Semitism as I am. You also know that you alone cannot stop this, but all of you can certainly speak out forcefully against it. We can't rewrite history, but we can be much more forceful today. All of us must remember those brave, moral people who tried to stop this. As all world leaders, all politicians must lead in this effort. Words are not enough. Political speeches are not enough. Laws must be passed, severe, tough, real laws that will put these hate mongers away in prison for a long time. Children must be educated to know where the hatreds of Jews lead. Those are all important. But there's another vital way for world leaders today to fight this age-old hatred. I've asked all countries to stop casting votes in favor of the UN's constant and shameful fixation on Israel. Exactly 3 years, 3 months, and 3 weeks after the liberation of Auschwitz, the Jewish people realized their 2,000-year-old dream and founded the Jewish state of Israel, if for no other reason than the fact that not a single country on earth would take in Jewish refugees when they begged for their lives. That is why the Jewish people need Israel. 75 years ago, the Jewish people left Auschwitz. They fled Europe. They were forced out of every country in the Middle East. And instead of living in refugee camps and turning to terror, they built a vibrant democracy in a place where democracy does not exist. They have created miracle after miracle while having to defend their existence every single day. No other country on earth has had to do this. And for this, the UN, some journalists, and even some government leaders constantly condemn it. But it's even worse. Israel has been singled out over and over again with the same lies that we heard about the Jewish people for centuries. Over the last 7 years alone, the United Nations General Assembly has adopted 202 resolutions condemning countries around the world. Of those 202 resolutions, Israel was condemned 163 times, and the rest of the world only 39. 163 against Israel, 39 for the rest of the world. We all know these votes are absurd. The UN ignores true evil dictatorships that kill millions of their own people. And it's clear as day that this kind of excessive anti-Zionism is nothing but anti-Semitism. I realize that here at Auschwitz, you are surrounded by numbers. 75 years, 1933, 1938, 6 million. But there's one number that still shocks us while breaking our hearts at the same time. 1,500,000, that's the number of Jewish children, 1.5 million, who died in the Holocaust. It's so painful, we try not to think about it. It just hurts too much. Had these 1.5 million children been allowed to live like others, children around the world, they would now be in their 70s and 80s. They would have been educated. They would have married. They would have had children of their own. Such a loss. But something else as well. What could these 1.5 million children have created for us all? What symphonies, what great literature, what technology, what medical breakthroughs do we lose from these lost souls? There is one more part of the Auschwitz story that no one ever talks about. When the survivors were liberated from this Nazi nightmare, they never sought revenge. They lost their mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers. In too many cases, they lost their wives and their children. And in spite of this, not one German was killed in retribution by a Jew. Not one. Think about that for a moment. After everything that happened to them, these Jewish survivors walked out of these gates and went on to build new lives, raise new families, work hard and create. Some grandchildren here today. And it is shameful that 75 years later, they now see that their grandchildren face the same hatred again. This is a shame and must never be tolerated. In the end, I'm afraid that all these numbers, 1.5 million children, 6 million Jews, these numbers are just too hard to comprehend. So let me leave you with one last story. It comes from the Eichmann Trial in 1961, where witness after witness described their experience here at Auschwitz. But there was one man who stood out because he spoke in an unusually non-emotional tone. He described arriving on this platform here, right here, with his wife and little daughter. They were herded out of the cattle cars, and they stood in line for the selection. Right over there, a doctor would decide who would go to the right to work and who would go to the left for extermination. This man was separated from his wife and daughter at that moment, and they were pushed away. On the witness stand, he said, "There were so many people, I didn't know how I could keep my eye on them." But his little girl wore a red coat, and he was able to watch the little red coat until it got smaller and smaller, and then he couldn't see it anymore. The young Israeli prosecutor, Gabriel Bach, was standing at his chair when the man finished like this. He stood there silently. Finally, the judge asked Bach to continue, but he stood there. Again, the judge told Bach to continue, and again, he just stood there silently. Years later, Bach explained that as fate would have it, he and his wife had just bought their 3-year-old daughter a little red coat. And Gabriel Bach said, to this day, if he goes to a sports stadium or a restaurant or just waiting down the street in Jerusalem and he sees a girl in a little red coat, his throat will tense and he cannot speak. Frankly, after this story, whenever I see a red coat and a little girl, I think the same thing. This is the legacy of Auschwitz, and it will never go away. To every Jewish person and non-Jewish person in this audience who leaves these gates today, we must do this. When we hear something that is anti-Semitic, when we hear someone talk about Israel unjustly, when Jews are attacked in our streets, do not be silent. Do not be indifferent. Do not just do this for the Jewish people around the world. Do this for your children. Do this for your grandchildren. But also do this for the little girl who, in the red coat, whose ashes lay 300 meters away, along with 1 other million tortured souls. They are watching us today. and I cry out in one shattering chorus. Do not be silent. Do not be complacent. Do not let this ever happen again to any people. Thank you.
Szanowni Państwo, zapraszamy do obejrzenia filmu pod tytułem Przedmioty. Oni byli tacy jak my. Objects, they were just like us. Przygotowanego na 75. rocznicę wyzwolenia niemieckiego nazistowskiego obozu koncentracyjnego i zagłady Auschwitz-Birkenau. Szanowni Państwo, oddaję głos panu dyrektorowi, opiekunowi miejsca pamięci, doktorowi Piotrowi Cywińskiemu.
Od wyzwolenia koncentrationslager Auschwitz minęło 75 lat. I dziś jest wśród nas
We have among us today over 200 people who experienced this hell. Hell that we cannot even imagine. Thank you so very much. What you have been saying through all those 75 years, what you said back in the camp was never again. Not for yourselves, but for us. Our children and grandchildren. We built this post-war world on our experience, on your experience, so we do owe you something. We all do. The world was meant to be different. The United Nations was to be the guarantor of peace. Crimes against humanity were to be always prosecuted. International cooperation and interdependence were intended to deter conflicts. Ecumenism was supposed to bring people of faith together. Today, however, from almost every corner of the world, we can see the revival of old spectres. Anti-Semitism, racism, and xenophobia are on the increase. In darkness, the resurgence of populism and demagogy strengthen ideologies of contempt and hatred. And we are becoming increasingly indifferent, confined within ourselves, apathetic, passive. We do not see, and we cannot see, we do not talk, we do not want to talk. The majority was silent when the Syrians drowned. In silence, we turned our backs on the Congolese. We practically did not utter a word when the Rohingya were murdered 2 years ago. And today, with silence, we conceal the tragic fate of the Uyghurs. Silence after the Holocaust is inhuman, and never again will it be human. Besides the Holocaust, our silence today is our greatest disaster, our self-dehumanization. Yes, that is correct. Self-dehumanization. The righteous among the nations did not click on likes. They were not known for writing protest songs, nor did they sign online petitions. They performed boundless good in dramatic conditions, rescuing concrete individuals. But that is the only reason why they save their face and their dignity. And how do we, with all our culture and memory, compare ourselves to them today? Worse than forgetting is a memory that does not bring any moral concern within us. It is then that the never again is lost. 75 years after Auschwitz, it is in fact in memory that we must search for sources for our responsibility today. Meanwhile, in our memories, we often only seek short-lived emotions without consequence, without obligation. Such memory loses its significance. How can one say never again while looking into the eyes of the Jews attacked on the streets, to the Roma being humiliated, people all over the world, persecuted minorities, refugees, the starving, the murdered, the hundreds of thousands of people incarcerated in various camps? Salman Gradovsky, who was murdered here in Birkenau, was right when he wrote shortly before the Sonderkommando revolt, "We have a dark premonition because we know." We also know and feel what has become of our world. Where and why did we squander our basic fundamental values? Where is our own individual responsibility, the responsibility of each and every single one of us? So, when will Auschwitz become a reality that has been overcome and liberated? In the very essence of this cry, never again, the liberation of Auschwitz also continues today, right here, right now, every day.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, may I invite you to a prayer. Let's pray together for those murdered in Auschwitz. Those who feel they can do it standing, please, let's stand up.
Proszę pana Dawida Wiśnie, ocalałego z Auschwitz, o odmówienie modlitw El Male Rachamim oraz Kadisz.
קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמות חללי השואה באירופה ובכל העולם, מאושוויץ ומדכאו ומבירקנאו, שהלכו לעולמם, שנהרגו ונשחטו ונשרפו ושנשרפו, כל מיליוני היהודים על קידוש השם בידי המרצחים הגרמנים הנאצים ועוזריהם, והלכו לעולמם. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתם. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם. אדוני הוא נחלתם. וינוחו בשלום על משכבם. ונאמר אמן. We continue with the Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah. Please join me, those who can. B'alma divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayechon v'yamechon v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala v'izman kariv v'yimru. Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevarach Yalam Ulol Me'ol Maya Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitpar T'romam V'yitnaseh V'yitadar V'yitaleh V'yitalal Shmei D'Kudsha Berichu Le'ela Min Kol Birchata V'shirata Tushbachata V'nechemata Damiran bi'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shmaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol ha'olam v'nomar amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen.
Proszę Jego Ekscelencję, arcybiskupa Salvatore Pennacchio, o odmówienie modlitwy Wieczny Odpoczynek Oratio pro fidelibus defunctis w języku łacińskim.
Oremus, animabumus Domine, famulorum tuarum misericordiam concede perpetuam, ut eis proficiat
Proszę Jego Ekscelencję Piotra Gregera, biskupa Kościoła katolickiego, o odmówienie modlitwy Wieczny Odpoczynek w języku polskim.
Wieczny odpoczynek racz Panie, światłość wiekuista niechaj im świeci, niech odpoczywają w pokoju wiecznym. Wieczny odpoczynek racz im dać, Panie, a światłość wiekuista niechaj im świeci, niech odpoczywają w pokoju wiecznym. Amen.
Proszę wielebnego księdza Mikołaja Dziewiatowskiego z Polskiego Autokefalicznego Kościoła Prawosławnego o odmówienie modlitwy Boże duchów i ciała wszelkiego w języku cerkiewnosłowiańskim.
Господу помолимся, Господи помилуй. Боже, духов и всякой плоти, смерть поправи, дьяволу празднивый, и живот миру Твоему даровавый. Сам, Господи, покой душу усопших раб Твоих, всех зде погибших, вместе светло, вместе злачне, вместе покойне, отнюдь же отбеже болезнь, печали и воздыхание, всякое согрешение, содеянное или словом, или делом, или помышлением, яко благий человеколюбец Бог, прости, яко не с человек и же будет и не согрешит, Ты, бо един токмо без греха, правда Твоя правда во веки, и Слово Твое есть истина, яко Ты си воскресение и живот и покой усопших раб Твоих, всех зде погибших, Христе Боже наш, и Тебе славу воссылаем, со безначальным Твоим Отцем и пресвятым и благим и животворящим Твоим Духом, ныне и пресно и во веки веков.
Proszę Jego Ekscelencję Adriana Korczago, biskupa diecezji cieszyńskiej Kościoła Ewangelicko-Augsburskiego o odmówienie modlitwy Wspomnienie zmarłych w języku polskim.
Wszechmogący Boże, przed Twoim obliczem wspominamy dziś tych, którzy na tym szczególnym miejscu kaźni bestialsko byli mordowani. Ufamy, że w Tobie, naszym Bogu, znaleźli wybawienie z cierpienia, doświadczyli zwycięstwa życia nad śmiercią i obdarowani zostali wiecznością. Wspomóż nas, abyśmy, czerpiąc naukę z przeszłości, przezwyciężali w sobie wszelką niechęć do drugiego człowieka. Motywuj nas do życia w pokoju, zgodzie i miłości. Amen.
Szanowni Państwo, proszę wszystkich o zajęcie miejsc. Już za chwilę 4 przemawiających dziś byłych więźniów i ocalałych z zagłady oraz przewodniczący delegacji państwowych zostaną poproszeni o przygotowanie się do wyjścia pod pomnik ofiar. Osoby, które pozostaną tu w namiocie przed bramą śmierci, będą mogły na ekranach obserwować składanie zniczy. Podkreślam, wszystkich Państwa poza przedstawicielami byłych więźniów oraz ocalałych z zagłady, a także poza
Apart from the survivors and the heads of state delegations may stay now, and homage will be paid to those murdered in Auschwitz. Let the lights that we are going to leave there be a sign of commemorating and paying homage to all the victims. After the homage ceremony, the delegations will return to the tent. Ladies and gentlemen, we have listened to the following pieces of music. String Quartet No. 5, Opus 27 by Mieczysław Weinberg. Requiem for Auschwitz by Roger Moreno Rathgeb. Trio Lento, Gideon Klein. Lament of the Earth by Daria Potsolda. Now, during the passage of the delegation to the monument to the victims in Birkenau, you will have an opportunity to hear Alexander Lassoig's Serena, which is the third movement from the fifth string quartet. Antonin Dvořák, the second movement from the string quartet in F major, opus 96. Arvo Pärt's Fratres, four-string quartet. The music is performed by chamber musicians of the New Music Orchestra. Irena Kalinowska-Gross, first violin. Agnieszka Lassoń, second violin. Aleksandra Badok, viola. Donata Sobik, cello. And Alicia Molitorus, flute.
Can I